Hello, and welcome to Relaxing Facts. I'm Chad Kay, and today I will be talking about the first Thanksgiving. Each week, I share interesting stories and little-known facts on a variety of topics, accompanied by gentle, soothing music. My goal is to help you find a sense of calm during your busy day. Feel free to settle into a cozy spot and let yourself be carried away by these relaxing facts. The story of the first Thanksgiving begins long before 1621, in a region shaped by the Wampanoag people for thousands of years. They lived in dozens of villages across what is now southeastern Massachusetts and parts of Rhode Island. Their daily lives followed the seasons. In spring, they planted corn, beans, and squash together so that each plant supported the others and kept the soil healthy. In summer, they harvested fish that moved upriver, gathered berries, and tended their crops. In autumn, they collected nuts and prepared food for storage. And in winter, they lived in sheltered areas where hunting and preserved foods kept their communities supplied. They managed forests through controlled burns that encouraged fresh plant growth and improved hunting grounds. Their political system centered around several linked communities led by a sachem, or leader. And in the early 17th century, their leader was Massasoit, who guided diplomacy and protected the region during a difficult and uncertain time. Across the Atlantic, the group later known as the Pilgrims faced their own instability. They were English separatists who sought freedom from religious restrictions and economic challenges in England. After several years in the Netherlands, they decided to establish a new settlement across the ocean. The Mayflower voyage lasted more than 60 days, with passengers packed into cramped, cold quarters. Storms rocked the ship constantly, supplies spoiled, and disease spread through the crowded passengers. When the ship finally reached the waters near Cape Cod, the passengers were relieved simply to see land, but they were exhausted from the crossing and unprepared for the winter ahead. The region where the settlers landed had been dramatically changed just a few years earlier by a deadly epidemic that swept through many Wampanoag communities. Although the exact disease remains debated, it likely came from earlier European contact. It killed a large portion of the local population and disrupted long-standing political and social networks. One of the hardest hit places was Patuxet, the very site where the Pilgrims decided to build their settlement. To the Wampanoag, this was a place filled with memory and loss. To the settlers, it appeared to be land that had been cleared and was ready to use. The settlers faced a devastating first winter. Food ran low, illness spread quickly, and the extreme cold made every effort harder. Nearly half the community died by spring. Those who survived did so with limited knowledge of local crops or hunting practices. The Wampanoag observed the situation carefully. They saw that the newcomers were struggling, but they also remembered earlier encounters with Europeans who had kidnapped native people, including members of the Patuxet. The Wampanoag leadership had to balance caution with the need to maintain stability in a region still recovering from epidemic loss. In March 1621, a remarkable moment of contact occurred when an Abenaki man named Samoset walked into Plymouth and greeted the settlers in English. His knowledge came from interactions with English fishermen farther north. He returned soon after with Tisquantum, or Squanto, a Patuxet man whose life had been shaped by earlier European encounters. Years before, he had been kidnapped and taken to Europe. After escaping and eventually returning to his homeland, he found his village empty from the epidemic. Because he spoke English and understood both cultures, he became a crucial bridge between the newcomers and the Wampanoag leadership. With Tisquantum's help, Massasoit visited Plymouth and negotiated an agreement with the settlers. This agreement promised peace, mutual protection, and the return of stolen goods. It was not based on sentiment, but on shared need. The Wampanoag sought allies as they recovered from disease and navigated tensions with neighboring groups, such as the Narragansett. The settlers needed guidance on how to survive the unfamiliar environment. The agreement marked the beginning of a cooperative relationship that helped shape the following months. During the spring and summer of 1621, Tisquantum taught the settlers a number of survival techniques. He showed them how to plant corn in mounded rows that trapped warmth and improved growth. He demonstrated how fish could fertilize the soil, how to find eels in the muddy riverbanks, and which local plants were safe to eat. He guided them through the region and translated during important meetings. These lessons were life-saving. For the first time since landing, the settlers began to feel that they could support themselves through their own labor. By the autumn of 1621, the settlers had a successful harvest. They gathered corn, beans, and squash, stored fish and shellfish, and hunted ducks and geese. With their food supply finally secure for the coming winter, they decided to hold a celebration of thanks for their survival. According to surviving accounts, the settlers engaged in target shooting and games, and the sound of the gunfire likely caught the attention of nearby Wampanoag. Massasoit arrived with around 90 men, and they brought venison and other foods to share. The gathering became a 3-day event of feasting, conversation, and contests. The food served during these days differed greatly from what people now imagine as a Thanksgiving meal. There were no potatoes or sweet desserts, and no sugar-based cranberry sauce. Instead, the tables held venison, wild fowl such as ducks and geese, fish, shellfish, roasted corn, porridges, squash, and possibly pumpkin in simple preparations. The meal reflected the land and the season rather than later culinary traditions. For both groups, the gathering marked a moment of cooperation during a time of hardship. It strengthened their agreement and acknowledged their shared challenges. Although the event is often remembered as a symbol of unity, the deeper history reveals a more complex reality. The cooperation of 1621 was genuine, but it rested on fragile political ground. The Wampanoag were adjusting to the loss caused by epidemic disease. The settlers were trying to establish stability in a land where they relied heavily on native knowledge. Over the following decades, more English settlers arrived, and the pressure on Wampanoag land and autonomy increased. Conflicts over territory, law, and cultural expectations intensified. By the time King Philip's War erupted in the 1670s, the alliance formed in 1621 had collapsed. Still, the first Thanksgiving remains important because it captures a moment when two different societies found common purpose during a period of uncertainty. It reflects the resilience of the Wampanoag people, the determination of the settlers, and the fragile but meaningful cooperation that shaped the early interactions between them. And that brings us to the end of this week's talk. If you enjoyed this episode of Relaxing Facts, then please subscribe, leave a comment, or click like. We do this in one take to show everybody that we're not AI. I hope you have a fantastic day, whether you're taking a moment to unwind or simply enjoying some calming listening. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Chad K, and I'll see you next time. Bye.